Buenas tardes, bienvenidos al Instituto Cervantes de Madrid. Es para mí hoy un gran placer presentar al padre Jordi Gispert, y especialmente por un tema muy poco conocido, como es la influencia de un maestro español en la figura de Tagore. Es un episodio, como digo, prácticamente desconocido, la relación de Tagore con los jesuitas. Sabemos que Tagore era una persona que no le gustaba la escuela, que hizo una educación prácticamente privada en su casa, pero sí que pasó una temporada en una escuela de jesuitas, y el padre Gispert hoy nos hablará de la influencia de Alfonso de Peñaranda sobre el gran poeta indio. Como digo, es una pequeña historia muy poco conocida por el público indio, creo, en general, y también, y aún más desconocida quizás por el público español, y por lo tanto pensábamos que era muy interesante buscar estas raíces entre España y la India a través de la figura de Tagore. Pero antes que nada me gustaría presentar a Jordi Gispert. La verdad que para mí presentar al padre Gispert aquí es una labor que me abruma muy bien. Porque la verdad, conozco al padre Gispert pues desde unos 20 años, cuando yo era un estudiante de sánscrito en Benares. Recuerdo que él vino en una ocasión a participar en un seminario de conversación, de diálogo religioso entre el hinduismo y el cristianismo, y evidentemente me impresionó mucho su figura. Estamos ofreciendo un pequeño libro, La luz de la sabiduría, en donde podréis realmente conocer más la figura del padre Gispert, un español que lleva 62 años en la India. Llegó a la India con 19 años, en el año 1949, creo, una India que recién entraba en la Liga de Naciones Mundiales, acababa de ganar su independencia, y por lo tanto una India evidentemente muy distinta. Si el padre Gispert nos podría hablar horas entre la India que se encontró, la India actual, los cambios que han habido. Y él hizo todos sus estudios eclesiásticos aquí en India, es decir, aprendió latín y griego en la India, aprendió también Gujarati. En Gujarat había muchas misiones católicas españolas, creo que las siguen habiendo todavía, de jesuitas, y también aprendió otra gran lengua clásica como es el sánscrito. Estudió sánscrito con profundidad, y tenemos pues una persona completamente formada en teología cristiana y que conoce también perfectamente los mimbres de la escolástica sánscrita, que es bastante complicada, y por lo tanto una persona que puede hablar con gran autoridad sobre el diálogo religioso entre el cristianismo y el hinduismo. Él, después de estudiar teología, se convirtió en profesor de teología en Curzon, un pueblecito cerca de Darjeeling, donde los jesuitas tenían su escuela de teología, y en 1965 fue a París a completar su doctorado, a hacer su doctorado, e hizo su doctorado sobre un tema que él es un gran especialista. El tema es Ananda, el gozo, especialmente el tema del gozo espiritual, de la importancia que tiene el concepto de gozo en el hinduismo y sus implicaciones también en el cristianismo. El padre Gispert dio una conferencia hace un par de años ya aquí en el Cervantes sobre el interesante concepto de gozo en la espiritualidad. Como digo, después, posteriormente, en el año, creo que fue en el 72, se traslada a Delhi, en el Centro de Estudio de Teología de los Jesuitas, aquí en Delhi, que tiene un nombre precioso en sánscrito, Vidya Jyoti, lo que significa la luz de la sabiduría. El nombre Vidya Jyoti da título a este pequeño libro que publicó la embajada en torno a la figura de padre Gispert. El padre Gispert, como digo, entre sus muchas actividades, realmente él se ha especializado en el diálogo entre el cristianismo y el hinduismo. Un diálogo que, como él bien dice, empezó ya en el siglo XVIII, con la llegada de misioneros, y especialmente con la influencia que estos misioneros cristianos tuvieron en las élites hindúes, el Raja Ramohan Roy, lo que llevó realmente a un cambio de perspectiva del hinduismo, a hacer un hinduismo más igualitario, más preocupado por los problemas sociales, un hinduismo un poco más terrenal, con un sentido más de la misión histórica del hombre aquí en la tierra, ¿no? Y de la importancia precisamente de... Porque como él dice, a veces el hinduismo en ese sentido puede ser extraordinariamente abstracto, extraordinariamente no dual, y a veces pues le resta importancia a este mundo material, y por ahí el cristianismo puede realmente insuflar en el hinduismo valores más históricos y que tienen que ver más con la condición del hombre en la tierra. Al mismo tiempo, esto es un diálogo en dos vertientes. Él siempre ha dicho que el cristianismo también puede aprender mucho del hinduismo, y concretamente, lo he dicho en muchas ocasiones, ese es un tema que algún día le tendríamos que invitar para que nos diese una larga conferencia. Es un tema muy complicado y muy complejo, pero he dicho en muchas ocasiones que el cristianismo sí puede aprender del hinduismo a ser un poco menos dogmático, a no tener tanto miedo de romper el dogma de la Iglesia, y también, como ha indicado él, a utilizar más la experiencia directa de la espiritualidad como una vía de conocimiento religioso, y aprender más, como digo, de esta espiritualidad viviente que está todavía tan presente aquí en la India. Pero bueno, me gustaría decir también, él es autor de muchos libros, y me gustaría aquí destacar solo tres en estos momentos. Uno es God's Word Among Men, publicado en 1987 aquí en la India. El siguiente que me gustaría hacer hincapié es Christianity in India, 2000 Years of Faith, publicada por Penguin en India, y que seguramente representa una de las mejores historias del cristianismo en India que se han escrito hasta la fecha, muy completa y con muchos datos. Y finalmente, me gustaría, especialmente para aquellos que tengan algún interés en las filosofías de la India, les recomendaría que se comprasen su último igual, ¿no? Un libro de 2004 que se llama Gems from India. Este es un libro muy pequeñito, muy leíble, en el que el padre Gisbert escoge conceptos relevantes de la filosofía india, y los explica y los hace asequibles especialmente al lector no especialista. Conceptos como Ananda, conceptos como su relación con la Trinidad cristiana, etcétera, etcétera. Pero bueno, me voy a callar aquí y dejar que el padre Gisbert nos dé esta conferencia sobre el profesor, el maestro español de Tagore. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Óscar, ya saben ustedes estas introducciones siempre hay que cogerlas con un poco de sal y con un método especial o un genre especial de literatura. Yo voy a hablar en inglés, if you don't mind. So I have to take you to English. Perhaps the best thing is to first look at the two pictures. The two pictures we have behind me. One is, you recognize now, Alfonso de Peñaranda, is the teacher. An old photo, as you can see, typical missionary, long beard, serious. And the other is Rabindranath Tagore when he was about 14 years. Perhaps the photo is 1 or 2 years after he was a student, or rather after these two people met. And my talk is about these two people, nothing else. Just look at that, and if you see that, you have enough. So I'm grateful to Dr. Oscar Pujol and to the Cervantes Institute for giving me this new opportunity to present, as Oscar said, a few little-known facts related to the early years in the life of Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore. A couple of weeks ago, India celebrated with joy the 60th anniversary of his birth, 150 years of Tagore. It is good time to renew our memory of him. Note that my lecture is going to be primarily on Tagore. I'm no scholar on the world poet, and a few months ago we had here at the Cervantes an enlightening evening on Tagore and the relation, it is related to the Spain and the Hispanic world, Hispanic culture. However, I do not think I heard that evening the name of probably the first Spaniard Tagore met in his life, in whose memory he preserved till the end of his life. My contribution today will be just a footnote to that session of that some months ago. Tagore and Alfonso de Peñaranda met much before Tagore was an international figure and a sought-after Nobel Prize winner, and much before he met Juan Ramón Jiménez and Victoria Ocampo, and much before his visits to Mexico and South America, visits that created a lasting fascination for the Bengali poet in the Hispanic world. The teacher was at the time 40 years old, Spanish Jesuit, recently arrived from Belgium, who put his hand on the young shoulder of the restless boy and inquired lovingly, says Tagore, Sneha Suare, are you not well, Tagore? My presentation wants to reflect why 36 years later, in 1912, the 51-year-old poet still remembered that hand on his shoulder when he wrote the original Bengali Jivan Smriti, soon translated into English and published as My Reminiscences. As we shall see, the memory continued even in later years to the old age of the poet, long after the teacher had passed away back in 1886. Before I go ahead, 2 words about the nationality of the teacher. I got a letter from Calcutta saying he's a Belgian. He was a Belgian. And so I said, yeah, you are right. Technically, he was a Belgian. Belgian nationality. Probably born, I guess, in Belgium and certainly educated in Belgium. He and his elder brother joined the Jesuit order on the same day in 1851. They belonged to an ancient aristocratic family of Spain, probably from around Salamanca, some of whom must have migrated to Belgium years earlier than Tagore, of course. There were some suggestions that his family may have had contact with the Jimenez family, but I have not been able to establish this. Whatever the length of the Belgian residence of the Peñarandas, and whatever the color of their passports, they remained ethnically and culturally Spaniards. And Tagore referred to his teacher as a Spaniard. The tilde on the first N of the name certainly is a reminder of the Spanish roots of the family. There is some doubts about the correct spelling. The English version of Tagore's Reminiscences spells it P-E-N-E-R-A-N-D-A, while the Belgian catalogues of Jesuits consistently give P-E-N-E-A-R-A-N-D-A, Peñaranda or Peñaranda. I think both names were found in Spain. Google gives both actually, and also all dictionaries. But surely he was officially Peñaranda. Perhaps I may begin first by noting a contrast between Rabindranath and Alfonso. In age, they were 27 years apart, a full generation. By temperament, and certainly by education, education in the Jesuit order, Alfonso was a man of the institution, a man accustomed to timetables and to daily routines, a man who could work creatively indeed as a member of a team. Tagore, I believe, was more of a rebel, an individualist who could not put up even with the restrictions imposed on him by school traditions and who loved the solitude and the peace of the forest. Like many other geniuses, he was a sort of a school dropout, which of course doesn't mean that all dropouts are geniuses. That's obvious. Tagore was a genius of literature in Bengali first, but also in English. As a member of the Bengali Bhadralok, created by the new culture flourishing especially in the second half of the 19th century, Rabindranath would help to shape a new India. Alfonso, though well trained in literature in the best Jesuit tradition, but especially he was fascinated more by the emerging sciences, especially astronomy, but also mathematics, which he taught quite often. Astronomy and its new techniques of spectroscopy and photography. In his mature age, he could spend hours explaining to young students the new discoveries in astronomy and other sciences. For him, looking at the stars was the beginning of contemplation of the greatness of God. As the psalmist had sung 2,000 years earlier, the heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork. Alfonso was probably sufficiently at home in English, but like most Europeans, he pronounced it with continental and probably with Spanish accent. Paradoxically, that seems to have been the reason why Rabi had a special fascination for the teacher. You will hear his words. Tagore refers to his difficulty in pronouncing the odd English sounds, which made him the butt of jokes among students, as a difficulty which is well known to most Spaniards, the present included. Before I give more information about the life of Alfonso, I must present now the main text where the old poet mentions his memories of the teacher. As I said, the text is recorded in my Reminiscences, published in English by Macmillan in 1917. Translated by an anonymous pen, we may be sure that the poet read and approved the translation, which is never literal. The Bengali text was serialized in the journal Probasi in 1912. Tagore was then 51 years old, and the following is the main text of Tagore's memories. After my promotion to the inner apartments, his home, I felt it was all the more difficult to resume my school life. Tagore had been initiated, had received the Upanayana ceremony, had traveled North India with his father, and now he finds it even more difficult to resume school life. I resorted to all manner of subterfuges to escape the Bengal Academy, that was school. Then they tried to put me at St. Xavier's, but the result was not better. My elder brothers, after a few, they were 14 brothers, I think, altogether, brothers and sisters. My elder brothers, after a few spasmodic efforts, gave up all hopes of me. They even ceased to scold me. One day my eldest sister said, we had hoped, or we all had hoped that Rabi would grow up to be a man, but he has disappointed us the worst. I felt that my value in the social world was distinctly depreciating. Nevertheless, I could not make up my mind to be tied to the eternal grind of the school mill, which, divorced as it was from all life and beauty, seemed such a hideously cruel combination of hospital and jail. One precious memory of Pavitra Smriti in Bengali, Pavitra, I suppose, of St. Xavier's I still hold fresh and pure. The memory of its teachers, the plural. Not that they were all of the same excellence. In particular, in those who taught in our class, I could discern no reverential resignation of the spirit, Bhagavat Bhakti Gambhir Nabrata. They were in no wise above the teaching machine variety of schoolmasters. As it is, the educational engine is remorselessly powerful. When to it is coupled the stone mill of the outer form of religion, the heart of youth is crushed dry indeed. This power-propelled grindstone type we had at St. Xavier's. Yet, as I say, I possess a memory which elevates my impression of the teachers there to an ideal plane. This is the memory of Father de Peñaranda. He had very little to do with us. If I remember right, he had only for a while taken the place of one of the masters of our class. He was Spaniard, and seemed to have an impediment in speaking with Charan, in speaking English. You could translate also his English pronunciation in Charan was not up to the mark. It was perhaps for this reason that the boys paid but little heed to what he was saying. It seemed to me that this inattentiveness of his people hurt him, but he bore it meekly, day after day. I know not why, but my heart went out to him in sympathy. His features, Mukashli, were not handsome, but his countenance had for me a strange attraction. Whenever I looked on him, his spirit seemed to be in prayer, Devopasna. A deep peace pervading him without and within. We had half an hour for writing out copybooks, or writing our copybooks. That was a time when, pen in hand, I used to become absent-minded and my thoughts wandered hither and thither. One day, Father de Peñaranda was in charge of this class. He was pacing up and down behind our benches. He must have noticed more than once that my pen was not moving. All of a sudden, he stopped behind my seat. Bending over me, he gently laid his hand on my shoulder and tenderly inquired, "Are you not well, Tagore?" It was a simple question, but one that I had never been able to forget. I cannot speak for the other boys, but I felt in him the presence of a great soul. And even today, the recollection of it seems to give me a passport into the silent seclusion of the temple of God. There's a way in which the translator puts the passport is a very non-literary translation. Excuse the pronunciation. Nivritas nistabda deva mandire madhya pravesh karibar adhikar. I got the right and the duty, the adhikar, that's a very Indian word. Perhaps more literally, I obtained the right and the capacity to enter into the interior of a silent and awesome temple. Mr. Dipankar Basu, who had done research on St. Xavier's, offered a different translation of the last para. He said, "I cannot speak for others, but I always felt the presence of a sublime mind within him. Even today, whenever I remember him, I feel I have been granted the privilege to enter the interior of a secluded chapel, Devamandir, a chapel vibrant with prayerful silence." We have then in this text, first, a severe critic of the school ethos of the time. For Tagore, the school was a mixture of a hospital and a jail. The compulsory religious character of the school grated on the free and universal nature of the poet's soul. but in spite of his general negative feeling, the memory of the Spanish teacher continued to haunt his mind through the years. One must add that this is not the only time Tagore referred to his teacher. In the Bengali sermon entitled Purity, I think the Sanskrit Bengali should be, delivered at Shantiniketan the same year, 1912, the year he wrote the autobiography, Tagore said, and this is translated by Pankaj Basu, those who aspire for purity renounce the pleasures of the world. Father de Peñaranda's inner beauty did not flourish only from the renunciation of material wealth and fame. His countenance would reveal that his entire existence was firmly grounded on what he knew as truth. The perpetual communion with the Master kept him saturated with the feeling of fulfillment. He would keep on rinsing himself in the steady and continuous stream of worship. He had installed his Lord in his soul, and that kept his life brightly illuminated by blissful purity. Much more than mere obedience to a solemn vow that he had taken, truth had sanctified him. You can get the Bengali text in the collected works of Tagore. In an obituary after the poet's death in 1941, Nikhil De recollects a visit he paid to Tagore, who was unknown exact date, in which the poet referred again to the teacher. And he says, Nikhil De, in the course of the conversation, Tagore came to speak of his old school. I was surprised that the poet began telling the old tale, he must have told it quite often, the old tale with a voice hushed with emotion. He narrated the story practically verbatim with particular emphasis on the last words. Tears filled his eyes when he said, even today, the recollection of that touch seems to give me a passport to the silent seclusion of the temple of God. Obviously taken from the reminiscences. Later, presiding a cultural function meant to raise funds for victims of flood, Tagore said, let me express as an ex-student of the school, that wasn't the Centennial School, my feelings of gratitude for your institution, which was an inspiration for me in my young days. An inspiration for me in my young days. I borrowed this from the unpublished notes of Basu. Interesting, there is a letter sent to Tagore on the 9th of March 1931 by a Mr. H.W.B. Moreno, a Severian, who commented on the poet's Jesuit teacher. In spite of his name, Mr. Moreno was not a Spaniard, but an Anglo-Indian, at one time General President of the Anglo-Indian League of Calcutta. The collected memories of Mahatma Gandhi mention the name of this Mr. Moreno half a dozen times. Moreno wrote to Tagore, in the letter is kept. It was about those years, perhaps a little later, that there was in St. Xavier's a Spanish count, and gave up all when he entered the order. He was a real ascetic. He was a brilliant musician and played excellently on the piano, I think I didn't know. But he gave up all for Jesus, as he frequently said. He was a wonderful mathematician and astronomer. When I read this the first time, I thought that it was just demonstrated the growth of popular legends. Oral traditions tend to grow and to make people bigger than they are. I said to myself. But further search into the Peñaranda family has revealed to me that there was indeed in the 17th century a conde, a count of de Peñaranda, who was Spanish ambassador in Belgium. Whether he remained there and remained there, the family, whether the family of Alfonso de Peñaranda was directly connected to this Conde de Peñaranda, I don't know. I don't think that either Carlos or his brother Alfonso would have been counts in the technical sense of the word, but they did seem to come from a rather noble family according to the standards of the time. Clearly, Tagore did keep a certain attachment to the school where Alfonso Peñaranda taught till the end of his days. The white marble bust statue of Jesus bearing the inscription presented to St. Xavier by Dr. Rabindranath Tagore 1927 is still found in the college and bears testimony to this. Apart from the sacred memory of Peñaranda, did St. David's School that Tagore attended in 1875 have any positive impact in the mentality and the religious views of the poet? I'm not sure about this. I think that Tagore's views were firmly rooted in the Upanishads and the Bhakti traditions of Bengal. Whatever knowledge he had of Christianity would have come from the general culture of the time and the English literature he frequented. At a personal level, in his mature years, he was rather impressed by Brahmabandha Upadhyay, a freedom fighter and a convert to Catholicism, rather than Keshav Chandra Sen, to whom Tagore never refers. Dr. Ashish Nandi has analyzed the relation of the poet Rabindranath to Upadhyay. Dipankar Basu suggests that Tagore's frequent reference to the divine as masculine, especially in prayers, especially with the titles Pita or Raja, in contrast with the Bengali concentration on the feminine, the Devi, may be due to the prayers learned in the school the few months Tagore was there. One can also think of the symbolism underlying the Janagana Mana, Adinayak, Vidata, all masculine attributes of the divine. Though this particular case may have been influenced by the occasion for which the poet wrote this ode, immortal ode. Tagore also composed a well-known hymn in Bengali, To Me a Mother Pita, printed in the collected works of the government. And Basu said that this hymn is very dear to the Christian, to the Christians of Bengal, who still use it in their worship because it seems to resonate with the spirit of the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father, which surely Rabindranath learned at St. Xavier even before, where it was recited in common before and after classes. Basu gives a transliteration of the Bengali hymn in that article, and his own translation, which reads like that: You are our Father. May we know you as our Father. May we obey you with reverence, hallowed be thy name. Do not pour out your anger on us, forgive our trespasses. O Father, O Venerable One, remove all our sins and faults. Grant what is good to us. Grant whatever pleases you. O Father, all that is pleasant and true proceeds from you. O Father, all that is pleasant and true resides in you. You are good. You are the essence of all that is good. We bow down to you, O Father. We repeatedly bow down to you. It may well be, as Dipankar suggests, that this hymn borrows from the very sources, but it is not incompatible with it being influenced by the prayers the boy learned in the school. The poet's devotional religiosity was surely based on interpersonal relation with the divine. I think even more than personal thing, more than the Advaitic and non-dualistic, which is also in Tagore, but more powerful, I think, is the bhakti tradition of interpersonality, interpersonal relations. He had also deep reverence and devotion to the specific person of Jesus Christ. Christmas was celebrated solemnly in Shantiniketan, joined to the traditional Hindu seasonal festival of Posh Mela. Tagore called this the Borodin, or the Christotsava, the great day, the celebration of Christ. As early as 1912, writing on Christmas Day to his son Ratindranath and his daughter-in-law Pratima Devi, then in the university in the USA, Tagore wrote, "This Christmas morning, once again, we have stood at the door of Jesus. On behalf of all mankind, he, our elder brother, prayed to our common Father, thy kingdom come." Our sages have also expressed the same intuition in a different language. "O you, manifest yourself to me. This is the eternal and universal yearning. If we do not make a conscious effort to experience this yearning in our lives, our existence will remain incomplete." This taken with thanks from Vasu. It is perhaps significant to add that his passing contact with Ravi does not seem to have left any permanent impression on the teacher. Alfonso died well before Tagore became a known literary phenomenon, and at any rate, he would not have been able to taste the honey of the Bengali literature. We have no evidence that he ever mentioned Rabindranath, although of course in fact we have only a few of his scientific papers, and we know only 2 or 3 of his writings, otherwise in French. Not much of his writings have been kept, I know. A bit on his life now. Just a few lines to fill up the life of Tagore's teacher. I mentioned earlier, Alfonso and his brother Carlos joined the Jesuits in 1851. Alfonso was 17 years old, young, and had finished secondary school. Carlos, like later Alfonso, stayed in the St. David's School of College. The time of school and college were the same, mixed up the same. But he seems to have taught only some Latin and French, and was not much in the line of teaching. He was more in the line of spiritual activities with the students and other groups, religious spiritual. In 1869, he changed residence to Boitacana, and 2 years later took a ship to return to Europe to recover his health, and actually died on arrival in the Italian town of Genoa in November 71. Alfonso, his younger brother, was much longer student civil. After 2 years of humanities, he studied philosophy for 2 years and had a long teaching regency of 6 years, after which in 1864, he went to Belgium and for 3 years of theology. He was ordained in 66 or 67, ordained priest, and he began teaching in various schools in Belgium, taught mostly humanities, English, mathematics, also Spanish in various schools. The unexpected death of his brother made him offer himself to take his place in India. The offer was accepted. In 1875, he came to Calcutta, never to return, where a few weeks later he talked to young Ravi. Unlike his brother, he seemed to have enjoyed teaching at all levels. His 21 years in India were largely devoted to classroom, though he also, like his brother, he also undertook many commitments of a specifically religious nature. He taught humanities, maths, astronomy, Latin, French, history, philosophy, mostly at St. Xavier's, Calcutta, but also in a center of Jesuit studies in Hazaribagh, where he was in charge of training youngsters, and for 2 years, 1 year taught them philosophy. And then he was also followed by Mangalore College, Jesuit College, and Tiruchirappalli. So he has spent 6 or 7 years outside Calcutta. Otherwise, he was in Calcutta at St. Xavier's, teacher and director of astronomy in the observatory of the college in Calcutta. At this point, you may ask, before we finish, why were Belgian Jesuits in the capital of the British Raj in the mid-19th century, and what were they doing there? These questions require us to take a few steps back to have a historical perspective. The Society of Jesus, the official designation of the Jesuits, had been founded in the mid-16th century by an international group of students of the University of Paris, not yet called the Sorbonne at the time, under the leadership of a Basque Hidalgo, Ignatius of Loyola. The soldiers, seriously wounded in a battle between French and Castilian troops, had a conversion experience, a kind of mystical convalescence that led him to a new kind of war, the inner war of the spirit, and the struggle to spread the gospel of Jesus both in the Europe torn by the Ascension and fratricidal wars, and in the new world being opened up by courageous discoveries, largely from the Iberian Peninsula. The Society of Jesus turned to be highly successful in Europe, so that within a couple of centuries it became one of the shapers of a new civilization, mostly through educational institutions. One of the closest friends of Ignatius, the founder, was another Spaniard, Francis Xavier, the first Jesuit to come to India, where his name is an icon. In 10 years, he also visited Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Indonesia, Japan, and China, and the coast of China, or the Nile coast of China. In the 16th and 17th centuries, Jesuits were quite successful in India also, and contributed to prepare the country for the new adventures ahead, especially through educational institutions. Both towards the end of the 18th century, in 1773, towards the end of the century, under strong pressure of the monarchies of the Renaissance, the Pope suppressed the Society of Jesus in the world. It survived in Russia, where the Empress refused to publish the bull of suppression. 41 years later, in 1814, another Pope restored the Society of Jesus. It took a couple of decades for the new group to establish itself in Europe, in the European scene, and to recover its former identity and some of its prestige of the earlier centuries. But soon their schools began to flourish again in Europe, and the Jesuits turned their eyes to the enterprises they had had both in America and Asia, as well as Africa. In 1834, therefore 20 years after the Restoration, English Jesuits came to Calcutta and began there at first St. Xavier's School. It was successful, but the English Jesuits came into conflict with the Pope appointed Vicar Apostolic, the Bishop Patrick Carew, 1814-55. Nobody familiar with European history will be surprised that there was a tension between British Jesuits and quasi-Bishop Patrick, who obviously was Irish by background. The Jesuits withdrew in 1848, and the first St. Xavier's was closed. Carew died 7 years later, and his successor invited the British Jesuits to come back to continue their good work. But the British expressed inability to do so, but offered to send a few men to help somebody else to start the new mission. It was then that the bishop appealed to other Jesuit sources in Europe, and in 1859, 2 years after the first revolt of the Indian troop, 1957, a batch of 7 Jesuits, 4 Belgians and 3 Englishmen landed in the Calcutta docks under the capable leadership of the Belgian Henri de Pelchin. Under pressure, they reopened the school in 1860, and Carlos de Peñaranda, the elder brother, was the second batch to come to India in 61. Alfonso arrived 14 years later. He was at once assigned to teach in the school and college. He loved teaching and loved science. astronomy was its recent techniques of spectroscopy and photography, I think I mentioned that, fascinated him, and he could speak for hours about the new discoveries to people who were interested in science. Otherwise, it remained for him a matter of personal contemplation of the greatness of God. He was put to help in the astronomical observatory developed by St. Xavier's College, Calcutta, and few people knew that the astronomical notes published anonymously week after week in Indo-European correspondence, today it's the Catholic Herald, weekly, were the result of meticulous research work by Alfonso de Peñaranda. His contribution has been acknowledged by scholars, particularly his observation of the transit of Mercury. I just quote from his volume, History of Science and Philosophy and Culture in Indian Civilization, something about about Alfonso. 40-year-old mathematician and astronomer Father Alfonso de Peñaranda had arrived in India to join St. Xavier's in 1874 and immediately plunged himself into Lafon. Lafon was a real scientific genius at that time, French, Belgian, I suppose, into Lafon's astronomical project. He had taught Rabindranath Tagore in 75-76. Till his death in 96, de Peñaranda assisted Lafon in many astronomical observations: eclipses, movement of the planet Mars, movement of a comet, radiation from a solar eclipse, the dates, Mars-Saturn conjunction, solar eclipse observed by St. Xavier's College team at Bhagalpur, the transit of planet Mercury, the occultation of Jupiter at full moon. Next to Lafon, de Peñaranda's popularity is worth mentioning. He used to write regularly in the astronomical occurrences column of the Indo-European correspondence. There were many visitors to the observatory, so that they had to introduce the necessary imperative of appointments prior to such visits. The Indo-European correspondent published details of astronomical observations listed above. After de Peñaranda's sudden death in 1896, the obituary suggested that the many nocturnal observations probably laid the germ of his liver complaint. To conclude, the meaning of the young poet and the meeting of the young poet and the Spanish teacher was accidental and possibly had little cultural content. But the words and attitude of Tagore in his mature years suggest that it was a meeting at a deeper level than any just a kind lecture, a kind gesture. For him, his countenance would reveal that his entire existence was firmly grounded in what he knew as truth, quoting Tagore. Somehow Tagore sensed a mystical component in the teacher of maths, who indeed was himself also a rather recluse personality, perhaps in this not unlike Tagore. A personality that exuded a divine presence. Without exaggerating the significance of the fleeting moment, are we not allowed to explain it as a moment of contact of two very different mystics? And that would be my understanding of Tagore and Peñaranda. Thank you.
Muchas gracias por esta presentación erudita sobre la figura de Alfonso de Peñaranda. Y es bastante impresionante que Tagore dijese de él: I cannot speak for the other boys, as you say, but I felt in him the presence of a great soul. And even today the recollection of it seems to give me the right and capacity to enter in civil awe in the temple of God. Me parece que son palabras muy, como ha dicho el padre Gispert, seguramente fue un encuentro breve quizás, pero a un nivel mucho más profundo, como has indicado muy bien. Como es costumbre en estas conferencias, abrimos un turno de preguntas a quien tenga sobre Tagore, sobre la misma experiencia del padre Gispert en la India, las relaciones del hinduismo, el cristianismo. Hay todo un de estos de temas que le podemos preguntar.
There are 3-4 questions. You talked about here color of passport.
Yes.
And anonymous pen. What is the indication you want to give?
No, that whatever the political situation of the political nationality of Tagore, the color of the passport, he was culturally Spaniard, or he had not ceased to be Spaniard culturally. That was the idea, the symbolism of the color of the passport. Nowadays we have different colors for different nations. The second one, the anonymous pen. I don't know who translated the Gibbon Shruti into English. There is an introduction in the book by the translator, but the name of the translator is not given. Maybe some of you scholars in Tagore will know better who translated. So I put an anonymous pen. It's not a literal translation. You can compare the Bengali and the English text, and you see that it's a rather loose translation.
And you said that you got access to the Vasu's unpublished contents.
Yes.
How do you got access to it?
I asked him. He sent me by email.
And this astronomy teacher, he taught other subjects also, many subjects.
Yes.
How was it? One or two is possible. You named many subjects.
Yes, I must say, I think, of course, nowadays we are much more specialized, but the educational system 100 years ago or even less was rather less specialized, and many teachers taught good languages, science, French, philosophy. All the Jesuits, of course, have done studies of philosophy and theology, but they had also studied culture. So it was rather common that they could teach, especially at the school level, perhaps not so much at the college level. They could teach several subjects at the same time, and they did teach that I know. So it was a different culture at the time still there. And even the university, even the public school system, I don't think it was so specialized as nowadays. Yes.
Hi, Professor. I wanted to ask you something about, you mentioned that unlike Bengali literature where there is a very clear emphasis on female representation of the divine, Tagore chooses to go in for male representation, so there's Pita and all of that. So you're saying that, are you making a connection with his Jesuit education to that, or is it just
Yes, this Dipankar Basu makes that connection in an article in this and I quoted it from there, and I thought it was reasonable, but it's presented as a hypothesis, not as a thing. I think there is some connection, possibly. That was usually was in. I don't know whether it is true, but you can be discussed, obviously. That will require more specialized scholars to know better the whole of literature of Tagore. Tagore obviously had also belonged to the tradition of the Arya Brahmo Samaj, and had certainly a tradition of Vedantic outlook, and some of his poetry is mystical, there are even Advaitic, but I think the stress, I find it much more bhakti, and there seems to be more I haven't read all his literature by any means. There seems to be more addressed to the god as father figure or king or the Nayak and the seat than the feminine. But I'm not sure of that.
So, can I ask you one more thing?
Yeah.
Also, can you tell me, like, how you mentioned more on the spiritual level, I felt, but did the professor actually have a very strong influence on Tagore's mode of thinking? In any way, in your research, did you find how he has had a bearing on the way Tagore thought about a lot of his fundamental thinking?
For what I understand and from what Tagore says, he was more a rather substitute teacher. I don't think he was a general class teacher of Tagore. He was a class teacher, but not the group. When he met Tagore, he had just come from Spain. And probably he was substituting from some absentee, as often happens in schools, to take care of the discipline of the boys or take care of that period when they had to do writing work, and Tagore was looking at the moon or thinking, as he said, his thoughts. So I don't know whether there was a deeper teaching, direct teaching of Depenyananda on Tagore. There have been some other classes where he got, of course, from other graduates or other teachers, more input, but I'm not sure that Depenyananda taught him in the sense a regular teacher. So I can't tell you right now.
Tagore was not an orthodox Hindu in the conventional sense, in as much as the Brahmo Samaj people do not believe in the formal ritualistic aspects of Hinduism. He was also a multi-dimensional personality. He was much more than a poet. He was a profound thinker, a noble soul, a dramatist, a musician, a teacher, and a painter throughout his life. But this aspect has not come out in your presentation so much.
No, you're right. I'm not presenting really Tagore. I'm presenting Depenyananda. What I knew of Depenyananda. Tagore, I'm not a scholar of Tagore. I have to study elsewhere. You're right. I think.
Okay, then. If there are no more questions, so we'll close our session today. Muchas gracias, la verdad, por esta muy erudita presentación sobre, pienso que un episodio de una persona interesante. Tagore, evidentemente, es una personalidad muy compleja, como he dicho, la conferencia de hoy era sobre Alfonso de Peñaranda. Muchas gracias por su asistencia y les esperamos en la próxima.